I'm creating a database to record various information, and at the moment I've only got 3 tables here: it's books, contacts, and ideas. So what I want to do is create a C++ program that I can use in order to input data and sort of work with the database through the C++ program. So I've only got a write function here at the moment, a write class, and one function called write data. And essentially this is just the process or the function that would write data into the various tables. So what I don't want to do is create, in this case, because I've got 3 tables, I don't want to create 3 different functions to write data into the 3 different tables. So what I did was I created a function with the table name as a parameter so that it writes data into whichever table is specified. And the way I've done this, and there's obviously other ways to do this, perhaps more efficient, I'm not sure, but basically what I've done here is because I needed the flexibility of being able to adjust the query so that it can insert data into tables with let's just have a look at this, to adjust based on how many columns are in the table. The books table, for example, has 6 columns, and the ideas table has 4 columns. So if I had simply written one query inputting data into all the columns, I wouldn't be able to adjust how many columns are in the query. So what I've done is I've created a for loop, and then the first entry or the first query just puts data into the first column after the primary key. So in this case, the first query would be insert into books, insert the book title from whatever I specified, and then once that is input, then that specific row in the table has got a primary key, and from then on I can iterate over the different columns. And as you can see here, let's just write that update automation books, set whichever column, let's say book author, set book author equal to whatever I put in, and then the condition would be the primary key. But I only have the primary key because I've already used this query. If I had not used this query first, there would be no primary key by which to specify which row to input the data into, if that makes sense. So where the ID is basically the primary key that was created, the primary key, where that equals the column index. Now the column index was just basically after I used this query and after the new row was created with a new primary key, I just accessing this primary key through a vector called column index. So the vector column index basically has all the primary keys that are in the table, and I'm accessing the last one because the last one is obviously the last primary key is the row of the value that I just inserted, and we access that by specifying the size of the vector -1, because the position index of the vector starts at 0. So if there's, let's say for example, there's three values in the vector, the first value is position 0, the second value is position 1, and the third value is position 2. So in that case, the size of the vector would be 3, but the value positions only go from 0 to 2. So I can't use the position 3, I have to use the position 2 to access the last value in the vector. So that's why I've got size -1 is to access the last value in the vector. So basically that's the sort of the system that I've landed on. Let's just go through this function. This is just creating the connection to the database, and this is the query. Basically, this section is the section that gets all the column headers. So for example, book ID, book title, book author, those headers are put into a variable, a vector variable called column headers. So that's just if you say describe, for example, if you say describe books, as you'll see, you'll get this. So basically, this is the values that I'm putting into the column headers variable. Then after that, I get another variable ID, and that's just to store the name or the header, the column header of the primary table, of the primary key. Sorry, because as you can see in the next row, I'm erasing the primary key header from the column headers variable, because I'm not manually entering data into the primary key, because that's auto incremented. So I delete that so that when I record my responses or the data that I want to put into the table, the column headers index matches up with my response index, because before I delete it, column header 0 would be the primary key, but I'm not inputting data into the primary key. So that would mean that for column header 0, I would be inputting nothing. For column header 1, I would be inputting response 0. And that's a bit of a problem, because I want my column header index to correspond with my response index. So basically, if I can write this somewhere, I want my column header 0 to column header 0, which is, for example, book title. I want that column header 0 to correspond with response 0, which would be the name of the book. Otherwise, it just doesn't match up. So this is the for loop that I'm using to record the data for the various column headers. As you can see, this prints out the column header, and I'm getting the input from the user, and that's going into a response vector variable. It's all these vectors are created up here. That response is recorded. And then once we've got our column headers and we've got our responses, then we can just input the data. So yeah, I've created a for loop, and what's nice about this is that depending on the size of the table, it will only input data into the specific amount of columns that are in the table, because it ends, or the iterations, the number of iterations depends on the size of the variable column headers, and obviously column headers specifies how many columns are in the table. So depending on the size of the table, it will stop at the last column, and then if I equals 0, which basically means only on the first iteration, because after the first iteration I will equal 1. So on the first iteration, I'm entering the first set of data, the first column after the primary key I'm inputting, which then creates the primary key. Then I get that primary key through this, so I know what row I need to be entering the other data into based on the primary key. And then we've got the continue, which means that it doesn't look at anything after that. It just goes immediately from there to the next iteration. And then obviously I does not equal 0, so it just goes to this last query. So basically what this is saying is based on the I, we've got the next column header, the next response, and obviously they correspond. This is why we needed them to correspond, because we can't have I of 1 and response of 1 if they're not corresponding. So that's why we needed that. So we're updating the table, setting the next column to the next response, and then the ID, as you remember, the variable ID comes from here, so that records the name of the primary keys column header. So where the primary key equals, and I think I explained this already, the column index variable and the last position in the column index variable. And because of the indexing starting at 0, we need to -1 so that it accesses the last variable. So that's basically how it works. I hope that makes sense. And then basically, just to illustrate why that is so simple, we've got just a short demonstration here. This is obviously just for demonstration purposes. When I get down to it, each category, like contacts, will have additional options such as add contact or delete contact or update contact. So each menu item will have additional menu items. But just to illustrate, let's use ideas because they have different numbers of columns. So if we press 1, let's actually demonstrate that. Okay, so if we press 1, got first name, let's just call that first name, last name, birthday, 2020, 5th, the 18th, keywords, industry. Okay, so we've done that for contacts. Let's just do that for ideas. I did it 2020 518 the description keywords. Okay, so what we should see then is let's look at ideas. So there we've got our new entry, which is the date, description, and keywords that we just input into the C++ program. And then let's look at contacts, and there we've got first name, last name, the date, keywords, industry. So yeah, so that works. And the reason it's the conditional statement over here is by the primary key, so that if you've got another entry with the same name, it won't change all of the previous entries. Because initially I used the first name as the conditional condition by which to enter into the other columns, and as you can see, when I changed something with the same first name, it changed all the rows previous that had the same first name. Yeah, just maybe something that I could change here is just could actually just use a while loop here. So while true, so this, if I enter data now, I should get ID. So let's go to it, and then I should be able to enter it immediately instead of exiting the program and going back into it again. In fact, we might want to say system CLR or clear, so that every time we're done entering data into one of the tables. Let's go. Nope, I think it's clear actually. Let's see. I can't remember exactly what that function was. Let's see. No, it's not that either. Anyways, nope. Last try. If not, then I'll Google that. Nope, not that either. Anyways, what that would do is that every time I'm done with the process, it would show this section on a clear screen, so it's not so cluttered. So yeah, so that is basically the write function that I can use to write data to any table depending on the table name that is linked to the MySQL database.